Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. I'm here with my amazing partner, Margie. Hey, Margie.
Hey.
And we are here in part 2 of another epic faith journey with an amazing couple, Jeff and Larissa Kindred. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hey. Welcome back.
Thanks.
In part 1, for those who missed it, pause, go back and watch and listen to part 1. We talked about Jeff's upbringing in Cottonwood Heights, Utah, going to Brighton High School. He talked about an unfortunate groomy kind of Boy Scout experience. He also talked about, being a high school athlete, basketball, tennis, going on to Snow and then Snow College and serving a mission as well, and being AP and being kind of on the Mormon Dream track. Larissa's story is really important because she talked about growing up as a biracial Mormon with great grandparents and grandparents and a dad who were all Japanese Americans, and what it was like growing up not only in a biracial Mormon home, in a biracial Asian home, but also when divorce happened and there were socioeconomic struggles. But she had a wonderful story of her doubling down as a Mormon. She's a dancer. She goes to Weber. She messes around a little bit, but gets super serious and eventually explores, meets her,
Thank you, Mark.
meets her returned AP missionary and pleases her Japanese grandmother mom by marrying a doctor. And and they start living the dream and they get married in the temple.
Yes.
And that's where we left off. How's that for a summary?
Yeah.
That's perfect.
Yeah?
That's good.
Yeah.
So this episode, we're going to be talking about several things. We're going to be talking about infertility. We're going to be talking about biracial adoption in Mormonism, raising Black kids in the Mormon church. And we're also going to start to talk about gender roles, Larissa's feminist awakening maybe, or at least their exploration and concern with gender roles. And we'll see how far we get. And there's going to be a part 3 as well. But without any further ado, guys, welcome back.
All right. We're ready to get into this.
So you guys get married and go to med school, right? And it's what state again?
Missouri.
Okay.
So we lived about 8 months in Utah while Jeff was finishing up at the University of Utah, and then we move away for him to go to medical school. And at that point, I've got about 3 years of school under my belt, and we decide that I don't know that we really decided. It just wasn't functional. We were going out of state, and this is before online school was a thing, and so. But that was kind of what we knew would happen, is that he was going to school and that we would prioritize that. And so we moved to Missouri for him to go to medical school, and we just kind of dove right into the medical school life.
And it's worth noting that you gave up your undergraduate degree studies, or is that true or not true?
Yes, it was. And you know what? I feel like I had a little bit of an inferiority complex because of it. Feeling like I'm not smart, or, like I wasn't driven enough, or should I have done this thing? So I actually became a really, really avid reader, and I've read like all of the classics. And I think it's just because I was so worried that I had, lived below my potential. So I've read like Dostoevsky, I've read like War and Peace. So I went through like kind of a phase where I was just reading everything because I was so worried that I wasn't smart because I didn't finish college. So, but yeah, so I worked. So we went to Missouri, and we were in the Nauvoo steak.
Oh,
yeah. So, and when you live outside of Utah, you don't. Your steak is big. So we drove 2 hours to Nauvoo. That's where our steak center was. So it was a really wide area to cover for the steak. So we were in Missouri, and we had probably been there just a few weeks. And we had mentioned, in the first part that our first year of marriage was a little bit tricky. And part of that was our family situation. So within the first maybe 3 weeks of being in Missouri, we felt so much better. Like we could kind of breathe a little bit because of the space. So we decided we would never live in Utah again. So we just it was that refreshing for us that I kept thinking I'd never lived outside of Utah. So I was like, am I homesick? Like I kept checking myself. But then after a few weeks, I was like, no, this just actually feels really right for us. And so we just knew after that we wouldn't go back to Utah. It just was a little problematic for us.
Okay.
Yeah.
So normally your job on the Mormon train is to start having babies.
Yes.
How'd that go?
So we tried. So Jeff's deep in school, and of course, yeah, you're married for, a year, and you think it's time we should start trying to have kids. I was always taught, don't.
You're 21 by then?
I'm 20. I'm probably 22.
What else would we do?
Yes. So I'm reaching that ripe age. And so, so we probably had been married a year and started talking about having kids. So we had tried to have kids for a little bit, and it didn't really happen. So, so we started kind of looking into what the options are. And both Jeff and I have sisters who placed babies for adoption. So it was Jeff's older sister placed a baby for adoption, and then my younger sister did while we were dating. So we had quite a few conversations about adoption and about, we had seen that it was a positive thing for our families and our sisters. And so that it was kind of a natural step for us when I couldn't get pregnant.
Okay. So how do you're not really prepared for that. They don't teach you 1 out of 10 or whatever of you aren't going to be able to have kids, but infertility is surprisingly common.
Yeah.
For how almost little to none it's talked about, right?
Right. Yeah.
And very challenging. I think when you think, you've always planned that you're going to have kids, and then when you can't, immediately start thinking, oh, what am I doing wrong, or what did we do wrong, or what's going on? And so we had decided we were going to try and go through the adoption process, which is a huge, you really don't understand how just a long and tedious process it is to go through it. And at that time, the church was still not just facilitating; they were actually
they were in the legal side. So eventually, the church is going to gets out of the legal part of the adoptions, but they were still doing it at the time. So while we were in Missouri, Jeff was there for 2 years for medical school, and then they would send you out to other schools, hospitals to do your 3rd and 4th year rotations. So we knew we were going to be moving to a different state after the 3rd year. So we kind of just sat on it for a little bit and said, let's wait, because each state has their own adoption laws. And so we knew if we started doing a home study and doing our adoption paperwork in Missouri, we would have to redo it when we moved. And so we just kind of sat on it for a little while. And so, while we were in Missouri, we were just kind of doing the thing. And
what were you doing to pass the time?
So I was teaching dance while I was there. I had taught dance through high school and through college, and we were in a really small town, and there wasn't a lot of, there just wasn't resources or lots of dance studios. So I actually opened a small, I rented a space and opened up a little dance studio. Yeah. So I did that while we were there. And then, and I taught early morning seminary while we were there. And so, and Jeff was just kind of doing the school thing. And the school recruits heavily out of BYU.
It's in the Nauvoo stake, and the town, they liked they knew that the BYU, actually just out of Utah in general, but I think a third of my class probably was Utah.
It was BYU a lot, yeah.
Members.
So there was tons of students that kind of drove the ward. There was so many. I think that they had identified that, if they get these LDS students, usually they were nice family people, and they've got wives that are contributing to the community. So there was a really big community of other students while we were there. And most of them had kids already, they had kids at BYU. So most of our friends had kids that, or even a couple of kids. And so,
is that hard to see your peers having kids and maybe to be asked what's going on? Or
it was a stressful time going through that. And I remember us having a talk once, and I was like, we need to just enjoy the time. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Enjoy the time before, but it's a stressful thing to go through. I mean, there is no two ways about it. It was not a very...
And then, like so many people had babies while you're waiting to have a baby. And I took on like a personal stance that I wouldn't go to any baby showers just because it was frustrating and it was hard and you kind of feel like you're an outsider. And so I was like, I don't go to baby showers. It's just not what I do. And so, because it's just, very consistent. Like everyone's in that phase of life. Everyone's having kids and I couldn't get pregnant. And so, it can be frustrating. I feel like a lot of people talk to us about doing infertility treatments and, it didn't feel super natural to us. And so it just didn't really feel like us. And so we just kind of waited it out and said, we'll see what happens. And then we ended up on the adoption route. So,
So you didn't do the super expensive shots and the take your temperature and all that super painful fertility treatment stuff?
No, we didn't. And, I think that, I didn't understand this about myself till later, but I actually think that I had a hard time even getting my brain around wanting to be, I wanted to have kids, but it was hard for me to think about being pregnant. And I would not have admitted that to anybody at the time, but I wasn't super keen on like sacrificing my body to have kids. And that's a hard thing when you're raised LDS and, they're telling you like, this is your purpose and like, this is holy and sacred and this is what you do. And, I've sat in so many church lessons where they were saying, well, men have the priesthood, but women bear children, so like, this is my thing. But as we are moving toward adoption, I keep thinking like, I don't know, I think I would actually rather have it this way. And I know I said that to Jeff, but I never would have said that to other people because I think I felt kind of guilty about not wanting to be pregnant. And so I don't have an infertility story where I'm just devastated and I did in vitro 4 times. And I know that is valid and that's very sad. But that isn't my story. I felt like I almost was like, okay, well, maybe I don't have to.
Dodged a bullet.
Yeah, like maybe I don't have to be pregnant. So it was kind of fine for me. Yeah.
Was it hard for you, Jeff? I think there's a biological pass your DNA on kind of instinct, maybe.
Yeah, I think I don't think it was as hard for me. I mean, it was stressful. It was a stressful time for us in general, but I don't think I had this real sense of needing to like spread my seed or like things like that. That wasn't something that was important to me, I don't think. Or like pass on my
the part in
gene.
the interview where John projects.
Does John need to say something?
A little bit. He's like, oh no, I don't know.
All right, sorry.
So
continue.
So we went through the adoption process in Michigan, and I don't know how far we want to go into that. We went into. I mean,
maybe however it touched your faith story, or not.
Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think this was so we moved to Michigan. We were in Missouri 2 years and then we moved to Michigan. And then we start doing our paperwork. So as soon as we're there, and it's just a lot, it's like background checks and you're writing like essay type
your parenting
questions.
Styles.
Yeah, they want to know your parenting style. And you're like, obviously it's like the best kind of parenting style there is. Like we have 2 little dogs at the time. We don't even have, so I'm like, clearly I have a really good parenting style. So yeah, but I mean, it's so rigorous. So yeah, so we're going through LDS services. So at the time we're in Michigan and we're close to Detroit, and the caseworker, or the director of LDS services in Michigan, she had really established like a good relationship with some of the hospitals in the area and in Detroit. And so when we were meeting with her, she said to us, like, there are Black children that need to be placed for adoption. Be real about it and think about it. Is that something you feel that you can take on? Because it's okay if you can't. Like if you feel like that's not something that you can manage, then don't manage it. And I think that is very helpful to know, because it's not right for everybody. But I think that with me growing up in a biracial home, and I felt like I was, like very open to talking about and addressing race. And so we really felt like that would be fine for us and that we could take that on. So, so that's what we told them. So.
And we ended up with, so we have 3 adopted kids. Our oldest, Beck, is a quarter African-American, and then Hazel is 3/4, and Golden is half. And Beck's very light, and Hazel's very dark, and then Golden is.
He looks like a biracial kid.
Yeah, he looks biracial. So.
And I guess 2 things come to mind. One, Larissa, is that, you're biracial. I guess we're all multiracial, so that's such a dumb thing. But you're biracial, that's interesting. But then also there's the having Black children in a church that has a long history of racism.
Right.
Anything you want to share about your thoughts as you're considering, as Orthodox Mormons, adopting Black kids?
So I don't think we considered anything that had to do with the church going into it, which maybe was naive of us. I mean, I think that we've learned a lot about what it's like raising Black kids, since the beginning.
You'd be raising Black kids in a super white church.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think so. And I think at that point we were very much like, raise the kids in the gospel and like teach them the right things. And that's the most important thing. And that will like take care of everything. So I don't think going into that we had any awareness of how this would affect them or what their experience would be in the church. So our first son, we adopted our son when we lived in Michigan. He is, his birth father is half Black, but he looks white. So we got him, and then we got our daughter when Jeff was in his residency. And that's when we lived in Indiana. So when we got our daughter, when I found out that she was going to be a girl, we have open relationships with our kids' birth moms. And
that's so valuable. I mean, in my studies, that used to be discouraged. But it is now kind of the trend and explain what an open adoption is for those who don't know.
So an open adoption just means that we have like a relationship with our kids' birth moms.
And we were with them. They selected us, and so we got to know them during their pregnancy. Larissa was at the birth of our daughter Hazel. We were both at the birth of our son Golden, and our birth mom Tiffany had wanted to have the birth her thing, which we respected.
So we weren't there when our oldest son was born.
And we keep in good contact with all of them and have excellent relationships, and they have good relationships with all of our kids, really, even though they're all birth moms of one of them, but it's kind of a big extended family, which is really nice. And it's been a really important thing for us. And
were they all living locally, all the birth moms in Michigan, or?
No. So our son we adopted, he's from Southern Utah. And so he was actually born in St. George. So we flew out to pick him up when he was born. And then, our daughter Hazel, her birth mom actually grew up in Missouri, but she had been accepted to BYU, and I think she was going to run track at BYU.
Or high jump, I think.
Yeah, she was a high jumper, and so she was accepted at BYU and knew she was pregnant her senior year and didn't tell parents, and then she was like going to move out to BYU, and she went and lived with her sister, and then she told her sister like, "Hey, I'm pregnant," so she didn't ever go to BYU. And then while she was there, they called her parents and they were like, she's pregnant. So those two are both born in Utah. And then our youngest son, he's our Tennessee baby. So he was born in Tennessee. His birth mom is actually from Utah as well. So all of our birth moms live in Utah now. They all kind of like, that's where their roots are. So so they're all out here now. But so we hadn't thought about this a lot, but when we were doing our first adoption, we were just having conversations with Beck's birth mom about like, do you want to have an open relationship? And I don't know why we just felt like we wanted to be really open, but I think maybe we had read things, but I had felt like, no, I want these kids to be connected with, like their identity and where they come from. And I don't want these women to feel like this was a loss or something was taken from them. I want them to be part of our life. And so we're on the extreme end of open adoption. You'd probably be hard pressed to find people who have a more open adoption than us. It's really, it's very open.
But it's still a tricky situation. And adoption itself, I mean, is a very, very difficult thing. I mean, these girls and this is, I mean, probably another whole other show of like, what I think the church is pushing or pressuring them to give up these babies and that gets really sticky sometimes as well. And adoptive parents and these babies and sometimes there's promises that are broken and promises not met and that. So I think that's a whole other issue, but our adoptions have been very positive and I think we have good relationships with all of them.
Yeah. When our daughter was born, she's our second child. Her birth mom was meeting with LDS Services and had a caseworker that was, like working with her. And, excuse me, after Hazel was born, the caseworker was talking to us and she was like, hey, make a plan for when you're going to come back and visit the birth mom with the baby. And we were kind of like, oh yeah, no, we're close. Like we're close with her and we've already developed this relationship and it's fine. And she said, no, we have an issue with adoptive couples courting a birth mom and like, kind of like, please choose us. And like, we're good. And then once the baby comes, it's like, see you later. And so they said that they had seen this and it was fairly frequent. And, whatever these caseworkers, they get very attached to these birth moms and see what they go through. And so I think that they were really trying to help us to understand that like, you can't just take the baby and run. Like this is very traumatic for these girls. So.
Okay. Well, that's an investment because, it's tough enough to be a parent. Now you've got to worry about, you've got to make sure you tend to the needs of 3 different birth moms. That's,
yeah.
And you're in med school?
And their extended family sometimes too,
Yeah,
which
wow.
gets so yeah, that can be
we have a colorful family and people
Literally.
people literally and figuratively. And people that maybe we wouldn't even normally have interacted with, and so it's actually really nice because these are just the people in our life. So
Yeah. Okay. All right. So how does your Mormon story continue? You got your 3 kids. It's not quite 4, I'm
Yeah,
joking.
that would have been ideal,
But,
right?
3 is, almost.
There's always the optimization.
I'm
Yeah.
just being totally. So you get your kids and you're raising them.
I have a quick question for you. How was the journey for you of becoming a mom? Did it feel like something that was intuitive? Did it feel like something where, wow, there was a learning curve? Did it feel like how was it for you?
Okay, I had a very poor transition into motherhood. And it was very jarring. And I think that part of it is that I'm not going through the experience of like being pregnant and preparing and, kind of nesting, or I don't have this like physical connection with becoming a mother. And in one way it's nice because I think Jeff and I really walked into parenthood as equals. We just were like, this is like, we don't know. And we've had the same experiences. And, sometimes as a woman, you might be like, no, I carried the baby and I started to really feel this maternal sense. But I also don't know if my personality, I think part of it is my personality too, is it just was so hard. And babies are really, really stressful for me. So I've never been a baby person. And so it was just so hard. And I think adoption adds another element to it, because I think I probably had some level of like postpartum depression, even though it wasn't hormones, it wasn't body. It's just the shock.
Yeah.
And you feel this like overwhelming sense of like, I can never take this back. Like once you become a mom, you're always going to be a mom. And there was like a real heaviness to that for me. And I'm not good with new babies. And so I got really, really bad anxiety when I think with all of our kids when they were babies, to the point where I start almost getting really like, this is never going to end. And, like I'm never going to get a good night's sleep again. So Jeff actually got up all the time at night with our babies, which is nice. They're bottle fed. So, Jeff got up with our new babies all the time, because I think you did better. It just wasn't this like pressing anxiety. Yeah. But I think the part that adoption adds to that is that you feel this huge amount of guilt, because, on 3 separate occasions, we've done an adoption placement, and that's when the birth mom hands over the baby to you.
Wow.
And these are really special experiences, but they're also like heart-wrenching to have this girl like give you her baby. I mean, and so, I'm at home and I've got this baby and I'm just like, I don't know if I'm good at this. And I don't even know if I like this. Yeah. And did I want to have a baby? And I feel horrible guilt, because I'm like, well, she would love to have her baby back. Like she doesn't get to do this. And so it makes me feel just so guilty for even feeling like I don't like this baby phase. Yeah. And so yeah, new motherhood was really challenging for me.
Yeah. And
I don't know that I really settled into like feeling comfortable until maybe my kids were into like the 4 or 5 age range. Mm-hmm. And I do think that I like kids and I love to connect, but there are some things that are maybe associated with like maternal motherhood that I don't feel like I connect with very well. I don't love just like sitting and rocking a baby. And so, yeah, so it was, I feel like jarring is the best word. It just was so sudden and kind of like shocking to like get into that phase.
Yes.
Okay.
I so hear that.
Yeah. That idea of postpartum depression as an adoptive mom, that's fascinating. I'd never, but it makes sense.
Totally makes sense.
But I hadn't contemplated it.
I mean, if you've got hormones going and then you've got, I would assume that there's a lot more elements to that if you've actually gone through birth physically. But I think that it's good for adoptive parents to know like that you might have some of these feelings too, because some of it is just about the experience, even without the hormones involved.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay. So
I'm so glad you talked about that.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're home with 3 kids and you're still in med school. This is where gender roles really start to settle in.
So we had been finished medical school, and then I had started residency in South Bend at the hospital there. And residency is really taxing. I mean, it's hours. The schedule is never the same month to month, and some, on lots of rotations, I'll be spending it once every 3 nights in the hospital on call. And so that was a difficult 3 years to go through. And Larissa, is in charge of the kids, and again, we never had this conversation, but it's just expected of her that she's gonna, take care of all of the things at home, and including like the most of the cleaning and all these things that we never discussed.
So much, isn't it?
It's a lot. Yeah. And I don't think that, like, when I think about who we were in the church and how this affected us, I know that gender roles or patriarchal systems, those aren't exclusive to the church.
Not at all.
I think that they became very toxic in our relationship. And I think it came from 3 areas. I think it came from society, and then it came from the church, because it was heavily reinforced in the church and institutionalized in the church.
Yeah.
And then I feel like it came from Jeff's job, because he had a high demand job, and I just had to revolve around like what he was doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like during these years, like the medical school and the residency years, we were kind of just in the trenches, and I had a toddler and I had a baby at home. We don't get our youngest son till later, and Jeff's just doing his thing. And so we were just kind of like in it.
Surviving.
And isn't residency like 80 hours a week? Like,
certain
so
rotations
inhumane.
certainly are. Yes, they're trying to crack down on that and make it better, and they have done some things.
Okay.
But it is taxing, and maybe the most difficult thing is that it's different month to month, so you can never get in a pattern of I mean, it's an unhealthy way to live, because you're working nights sometimes, and then you're working days sometimes, and then you're not eating well, and you're not exercising regularly. You can't get in any habits because they're just every month it switches your time when you're at work and when you're not at work, and that was taxing. I think the resentment at this time was building, even though we didn't know to name it.
Yeah.
I mean, in our marriage, I feel like we had a good marriage, but definitely on the inside of Larissa, there's this resentment that's kind of building up year after year, and we hadn't identified what that was or why it was happening. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. And while we lived in Indiana, I was the young women's president the whole time. And so like Jeff can't help me with the kids because he's gone. And so I'm like lugging my kids to young women's activities, and the youth programs of the church have so many things. They have like standards night, and then they have, like the youth council, and I don't know, there was like so many things. So I just like took the kids along with me and did the thing. And and I don't think it was identified some of these issues during that time, because we were just like deep in the trenches.
Yeah. You're on the train, as I like to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really quickly, you had mentioned you met Lee and Cody Young. Was that in Missouri or was that in Indiana?
In Missouri.
Okay.
Yeah.
We are in the
Okay.
We are the same. So he was a year ahead of me. Okay. So during his second year, I was a first year, and then they left for their third and fourth year, and so we just.
Do you have memories of Lee and Cody at all?
We didn't know them that well.
We didn't know them that well.
I mean, we interacted because we were members.
But they were in another class, like another school class, like another graduating class. They were in our ward, and so we went.
You remember them?
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Anything you remember about him, or not so much?
No, I don't know if there's anything in particular. Just that we know.
And then you met Patrick Mason when you were in South Bend.
So when we were in Indiana for Jeff's residency. Yeah, Patrick and Melissa had just moved back from Egypt, and they were back in the war because they had been in at Notre Dame before, and then they were back. So we knew them for a couple of years.
He was the Elders Quorum president.
Mm-hmm.
I was their home teacher for a while,
So you met Melissa too.
Uh-huh.
Okay, fun. I just met Melissa. So
they're fantastic. Yeah, no, they're fantastic. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So you're in South Bend, and like, is this the point maybe to talk about what it's like as a white and a Japanese American mom to be raising 3 biracial or black children in the Mormon Church?
I think so. So when we found out that Hazel was coming and that she was going to be a girl, I really got into black hair, like black hair care. And I knew enough at this point that I needed that it was it's not just hair, it's very cultural. And I wanted to be a good mom of a black daughter. And so I was like, I need to make sure I know how to do her hair, and I teach her to care for her hair. So I got way into black hair, like super, super into black hair. So at the time there was a documentary that came out, and it's called Good Hair, and Chris Rock did it, and it's really good. And probably no one has seen it and no one cares about it.
I'll put it in the show notes.
Put it in the show notes.
No, but white people are like,
good.
Why are we talking about hair?
No, it's so good. I think I went and saw it in the theaters, and I'm pretty sure I was on my own. I was just like sitting in the
It's called Good Hair?
It's called Good Hair.
Okay.
It's about kind of like the cultural expectations surrounding black hair and women's hair in particular. And it also is about the natural hair movement. So for many
Black power.
Many years, like black women had been trying to, like adhere to white beauty standards. So they're straightening their hair, doing chemical relaxers, which honestly is fine. Except that it's sad that you feel like you can't have your natural hair. So, and anyway, so I got really into the the Black natural hair movement. So I saw this movie and I just am like, I'm going to be a good mom to a Black daughter. And so I get way into her hair. So when my daughter comes, I'm like sectioning her hair and we have like wash day and I'm like, she's sleeping in a bonnet and I learned how to box braid and I'm doing like 2-strand twists. And none of these words mean anyone to anyone who's listening, unless you're like a Black person. So I just got way into Black hair. So this was like my first kind of foray into understanding that like, I need to know about this. I need to understand this if I'm going to help my daughter have a racial identity. And of course, I grew up feeling not connected to my racial identity. And so I feel like I really, really got involved in like what will be her racial identity. So I get really so Black hair is my first thing, but I go full bore into what I need to do so that I can raise Black children and help them connect with their identity. And honestly, I think that one of the most important things I learned along my journey is that I can never tell my kids what it's like to be Black. And I think that, and I like think about this all the time, is that like my kids are going to need to be connected with Black people, with their community. And I have to understand that like, I can't tell my daughter what it's like to be a Black woman. Only she's going to have to learn and understand what it's like to be a Black woman. But what I can understand, I need to figure out and I need to make sure that I share that. So I get really deep into like African-American history. And so I'm just like, I want to know the things. I want to understand who are the people. You know, for a while I was like way into like how hip hop came about, which is really, really interesting in like late 70s, early 80s. So I just got way, way into my kids and their racial identity. And so in 2015 is when Trayvon Martin was killed. And it was just devastating to me. And I don't think that I really understood racial profiling until Trayvon Martin was killed. So I was very, very affected by this, more than like I had been about other things that had happened like this. And it's because my daughter was just a few years old and I kept thinking like that could have been my child. And, what does that mean? And so at that time, I also really got into understanding like, what is the issue with police brutality? Why is this happening?
Yeah, sometimes kids are getting shot for just wearing a hoodie, walking through a white neighborhood, right? It's you would have to think as a white parent, this could happen to my kids. I'm white, but it could still happen to my kids if they put on a hoodie and walk through the wrong neighborhood or drive while Black, right?
Yeah.
Or are running with a hoodie.
Oh, right.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Why is this person running through our neighborhood? Let's get him,
And I think I think that I was really, really into this. And I think I kind of like tried to like bring Jeff into it with me. And you kind of had a different, like you just weren't as connected with it as I was. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah, I think so. And it wasn't, I don't know. I think I was still in the mentality again, that the church is the thing that's going to protect our kids, or I mean, and I realize how naive that is now, but in the time, I mean, that was the thinking, was that the church, if we just teach correct principles, that's the thing that's going, or teach the church principles, live the gospel, that's the thing that's going to protect our family, that's the thing that's going to change, and so I think that was my thinking, that I was not as concerned at that time. Yeah.
Okay. And also there is a strong association with Orthodox Mormonism and let's just say the Republican Party or conservative politics, which in the modern era, especially in the past 5 years, in my experience, tends to look down on the Black Lives Matter movement, on progressive social issues. And so, I mean, if I don't want to project this on you guys again, but if Larissa is becoming sensitive to Black identity, police brutality, Black Lives Matter, and Jeff, you're staying kind of your priesthood, conservative, privileged white guy in medical school or in medical residency, that might start to feel uncomfortable for you. Like, well, we're getting too woke here.
Yeah.
Right?
I'd say that's a good. Is
that fair?
I'd say that's a good summary. Yeah.
And I think Jeff was kind of like, I don't think that would happen to our kids. Right. Like, and I think I was in a different place where I was like, no, it can happen to anybody, and it does. And, but so yeah, we were in different places. I don't think you weren't in any way insensitive to our kids' racial identity. It was just that he was looking at it.
Just be Mormon.
In a different way,
all
yeah.
this is just be good Mormons.
Yeah, honestly, I mean that is sad, but I mean I think I had that.
We can just be
I think
good
I had that mentality.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think this is where I get my first shelf item, because I'm trying to talk to our kids about like, this is what happened. These are great, Black Americans. And so I'm really like wanting to help them to understand like their history. And so we get to the point where I'm thinking I am going to have to explain the priesthood ban to our kids. So how do I frame this for them? And I don't like it, and so I don't even understand it. So I kind of did I wouldn't call it a deep dive, but it was kind of a church approved dive into like what has been said about this priesthood and temple ban. And so I got into it, and, there's so many different narratives that are said, like, people link it to the curse of Cain. And then people say, no, it was just a timing thing. Just like with the Gentiles, it was just a timing thing. I don't know, like you hear different things. And so I kind of
less valiant in the pre-existence.
Yes. Yeah. The Bruce R. McConkie, like Mormon doctrine thing, that they were kind of fence sitters in the pre-existence or whatever. So there was all these different things. And so I was kind of digging into them, but from church, with church approved resources. And in the end, I was like, I think that it happened because of racism. Like, that's just where I landed. Like, I was like, none of this makes sense to me. And so I think in the end, these are all just excuses. And the church came about in a time where this was not uncommon to believe. And so in the end, that's just kind of what I settled on. Is I was like, I think that it came because of racist attitudes. And maybe that doesn't mean the church isn't true. It just means that there were racist attitudes, and they kind of came into, how the church functioned. And so, yeah, that's kind of like what I settled on with that.
And as you get those items, it's funny how you start to, in your mind, rearrange it. So it's like, yeah, well, the church can still be true. It just is that, they had racist leaders in the past. I mean, you start to make these rationalizations and justifications and, to make things work.
But that's a crack. Just the idea that the church could be full stop racist.
Yeah.
That's a crack.
And so I don't know how we became aware of Paul Reeves' book. I haven't read Paul Reeves' book, but
it's through a podcast.
Yeah. I feel like you had listened to it or something and sent it to me. So
he's a University of Utah scholar who's kind of like the church. He wrote, I think, the first draft of the church's Race and the Priesthood essay, if I understand it right.
I didn't know that.
I think so. I could be wrong. But he's U of Utah professor, expert on racial relations. Churches in 2022, the church's go-to guy for scholarly approach to the priesthood ban. Yeah.
And in his book, I know his take was that the church kind of had latched onto whiteness because they were persecuted. They were almost looked at as other because of, their kids came from polygamous relationships. And so people kind of looked down on them. And so they kind of had this kind of like a search for whiteness so that they could be accepted like amongst American Christianity. But I don't know if I jive with that or not, but I do. But his take was that it came about because of racist attitudes. And so I felt like that also kind of gave me like the space to say like that makes sense. Like what he's saying makes sense. What I understand about, racial history, which at that point was getting to be a lot because I'd spent so much time like trying to understand like what's going on with like these like different racial communities. So I latched onto that and I was like, you know what? I feel like it's the simplest thing. Like it was just racism and it wasn't okay. And so that's kind of what I had settled on with that. And then, but raising our kids though in the church, I mean, when you have Black kids in the church, I think you just start to really identify, we talked about how the church is culturally white, and that becomes very, very apparent when you're raising your Black kids. And, I want my kids to have representation. I want them to see themselves. But I mean, you've got like white Jesus, and you've got like all the white leadership, and you've got, and even the stories that they tell in general conference, it's like, I grew up in Idaho and I was with my dad and we were collecting fast offerings with a red wagon. Like, I'm just like, this is a certain experience, and it's nice and it's fine. But I really started to feel like, gosh, I don't know that this is something that we are relating to very well. And, I had this experience a couple of years ago because when we were like still watching conference, and one of the 70 gave a talk, and he was talking about how he got to go golfing at St. Andrews. And I was so mad. Do you remember? I was just so mad. I was like, this is the most white privilege story I have ever heard. Like, you went golfing at St. Andrews in Scotland, and he was like telling about how this was like such a special experience. And I was like, I hate this story. I hate it so bad. Just because like, this is so, I mean, it's privileged on a few different levels, but I was just like, oh, I don't know. These are not the stories that I'm relating to. I don't think these are stories that are going to connect with my kids. It just starts to become a thing where I start to worry about what will be their experience in the church. And because we wanted to be like that Mormon family, we are kind of gearing our kids to go to BYU. And we don't live around a ton of members in the South. And so we are kind of grooming our kids to go to BYU. But I start thinking like, what will that experience be like? And will people want to date my Black daughter? And is that going to be okay? Are we going to have families that get weird about it? I don't know. And so, yeah, these are all things that start to be a little concerning for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I, just a side note, something I hadn't thought about until recently. Yes, a Brazilian Black man got the priesthood, Helvecchio Martins or whatever his name was. And then recently they've had several area authorities from Africa. Mm-hmm. My understanding is, as of 2022, there's still never been an African-American that's made, area authority or general authority. So it's okay to bring Africans on if they stay in the 3rd and 4th and 5th and 6th and 7th quorums of the 70 in those area presidencies. But African Americans are still not really welcome at the table. Yeah. In the 1st and 2nd quorums of the 70 or anywhere, as I understand it. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, that does sound right.
And that may just be the demographics we're pulling from, but it's not insignificant, especially if you're raising kids in the U.S. in the church.
They did have the first African American woman speak at conference, I heard.
Yeah, in 2022.
2022.
I mean, the implication is that took a long time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and I could just say, like, starting to develop sympathy for racial diversity and police brutality, and acknowledging that the church is racist, and then starting to even think about privilege is not good for a Mormon testimony, in my experience. Yeah,
it's a real struggle. And then, I don't know what year it was that the church did their B1 event. Yeah. Do you remember? It was a big to-do.
This was like, forever, for 20, 30 years, we've all been waiting for the church to apologize for the priesthood and temple ban to Black people. It's never come. But this was, Dave Biesinger, who was on Mormon Stories, he's a friend of ours. He helped plan the B1 event. But it was supposed to be like this extravaganza gala in downtown Salt Lake of like, we love Black people. Let's talk about the Black pioneers. Let's have Black people sing in gospel choirs, and without falling short of an apology. Yeah. Let's just let the world know that we actually love Black people now.
Yeah.
Right.
And we watched it on TV, And I mean, I was crying during most of it because I was so happy. I mean, at that point, we're still there. We're still in the church. So I'm just feeling like finally, like the church is going to like talk about, they're going to tell Black stories. They're going to like, and we watch it with our kids, and I'm so emotional, and we're seeing like the Bonner family singing, and I'm like, yes, these are the hymns we should be singing, because it's like they're singing it. It's just like I don't know. I'm not like a huge lover of church music, so I was just like, and Gladys Knight is there, so I was like, this is the Blackest thing the church has ever done, and I'm here for it. So I was like loving it, and loving that our kids could see it. They're talking about the people in like Haiti that were like running their wards, you know, like on their own. And then the church comes and they're like, we're already doing this thing, or I don't know. It was so good. But the thing that was so frustrating is that then I'm like talking to all the people in our ward, and I'm like, oh my gosh, did you watch the B1 event? And literally nobody even knew what it was. Like no one cared. No, like our friends didn't know. I was like, no, you need to watch it. It's on, you can watch it on YouTube now. And they're just like, yeah, it sounds really good. Nobody watched it. No one cared. And so I was just like, why does no one care about this? Like, why is this not a thing? Like, why are we not so concerned about this? And that also makes you kind of feel a little bit lonely in the church. Is like, this is such a big deal to me. This is my kids. This is their community. This is their people. Why are we talking about it? Maybe it's just a human thing,
but like, if you don't have a gay kid, you don't really care about the LGBTQ issues until someone you really care about.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a Black kid, why would you really care about?
I think you're right. Yeah. Until it becomes personal, it is really hard to, especially when you think that you have the fullness of the truth, right? I mean, until it becomes real to you, it's really easy to not be concerned about those things. I agree.
Yeah.
I think too, I don't know. I have to think it makes a difference when you have for white people, such a self-referential narrative that is actually reinforced in school. And so you just have this really self-involved way of looking at the world.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it really makes it so that it feels like your narrative is the universal narrative, and it makes it seem like the Black narrative or the Asian narrative or the Hispanic or the gay like all of those are niche, right? Because you kind of view yours as like, no, this is kind of like the regular thing, and these ones are all kind of like little side things. So yeah, I think that for me, it started to make me feel very much like maybe this is not exactly the community where I'm connecting.
But we were still doing all the things. I mean, we were reading our scriptures every night, and we were doing all the things at this point still.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So what happens next in your Mormon journey?
So we're just kind of like deep in it. So once we moved so after Jeff is done with his residency, he gets a job just outside of Nashville. So we moved there. And I think we just really settled into, you know, Jeff's in his job, and I'm doing the thing with the kids. And Jeff gets called into the bishopric. So Jeff served in one bishopric, and then that bishop was released, and then he was called to the next bishopric. So Jeff was serving in a bishopric for about 7 years straight.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I'm...
How was that for you, Jeff? I mean, it's hard enough to be in medical school and then a doctor. You've got young kids, and now you're in a bishopric for 7 years, which means you're not sitting with your wife and kids for 7 years.
Yeah.
They're sitting alone while you are up on the stand.
Right.
And all the meetings.
All the meetings. That's the other thing.
Oh my gosh, it's so many meetings.
You'd leave at like
and I'd leave early
6 in the morning, and then they had to like count tithing after. And so,
how was that for you, Jeff?
Yeah, it was exhausting. I mean, my Sundays were like another work day, but the other thing that it was doing was just taxing Larissa to no end, right? I mean, she's getting all the kids ready for church, having to like sit with them at church. So in a way, it's a little bit easier because I feel like this is the most important thing I can be doing. And so I get to go, you know, I'm going to meetings, and even though that's not that, I mean, it's oftentimes boring or not that great, it still is excusing me with a valid excuse to not have to do a lot of the parenting. I mean, I really think that's a part that I think this is something, again, in the church that we don't talk about, is that men get an excuse, like a pass, to not have to do the things at home because they're doing something more important, right? If you're called to these callings, and sometimes in these callings, we're getting a lot of validation, and we're getting a lot of people that are like looking up to you as like answering their questions, or thinking that you're getting revelation from God for their calling. And so you get you feel a little important, and you feel, again, I think it just comes back to validation that I think a lot of men aren't getting at home maybe. And so it becomes a little bit, I really think that a lot of callings become easier to be at church doing the callings than it is to be at home. I think that's a real thing.
Would you rather deal with screaming babies changing diapers, or
Right.
go make big decisions at the head of your congregation?
Yeah, and you think it's more important, right? This is more important than doing those menial tasks at home. Like, I'll just let my wife take care of those.
That's her role.
And that's not a conscious thing, but it's certainly a subconscious thing, I think, that is a real thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So is a wedge developing between you two as you get more and more churchy in the bishoprics and
do you sense in your lives a little bit like the roles are creating kind of a parallel lives dynamic where, you're in different worlds kind of, or were you still connecting?
I think we were still connecting, but I think we were not recognizing that there was some division, or maybe some paralleling going on. I still feel like we had a fairly good relationship, but it was funny because we would, how would you describe it? I mean, the resentment was definitely there.
Yeah, I think it was building. I think like Jeff and I had always, since we moved away from family when we were early in our marriage, I think we had always really gotten involved with our wards and kind of like adopted them as our family. And we had always been, found people that we were close to in our wards. And so I think since we were kind of away, we always kind of had a fairly good thing going because we were really relying on each other. But I definitely think that once you got settled into your job and you were just busy and there was the stress of like building a practice, I think that this is when I started to feel very much lost, like I didn't have something or that I needed something. And I always get into like little side businesses or like different things. And I think that I've been kind of chasing my whole life, trying to find like, what can I build that's special or that's me or that's unique to me. And so I think that I was always looking for something that I could do and not ever really feeling like I had the space to do it. And so I think I was definitely starting to kind of chafe under that. And even though I think we were happy and had a good life together, but we would have fights and things would come out.
I think that's when they would really start to come out, is things kind of boil over.
Yeah.
And then you'd see the resentment and then it would settle back down for a period. And then,
but I don't think we had really identified. No. I felt it took me a long time to identify like, oh, I think I'm resentful. Like for me, even to say like, I think that's what I'm experiencing.
Resentful of what? If you had to put words to that resentment, what was the resentment?
Of my life revolving around Jeff's life, honestly. And so,
and again, I think this goes back to when we got married, never having a conversation of what does our life look like? It was always like we're going to go to medical school for me. This was my dream. This was what I was going to do. And Larissa, I mean, it's not like she was putting up a fight against it. It's just like, this was the understood.
Yeah.
We never had an agreement plan. That was it. And I think that was a big problem. And I think a common problem, again, in the church because of the messaging they give.
And I think once we kind of identified it, I was mad at you for a long time. And I think I had to get to a place where I understood my complicity in this, because I also accepted this, or, like I allowed this and this is what I was getting from it. And so that's where we're going to end up at that place. It took us a long time to get to that place, but but yeah, I think it was all building at this time, even though, you know, in general, I think we were happy and had a good relationship. But,
I remember that with Margie. I just remember just realizing, and Margie, I think there were a lot of things that were emotionally hard for you, but I just remember just like these late nights at work where Margie calls in and there's just all sorts of really hard things are happening at home. I just remember thinking, I got the easier job for sure.
Yeah.
You know, how was that? Do you relate to that?
Yeah. And also to this idea of having like a yearning for a space, for some place for me to sort of be able to thrive independently of this role that involved so much of me, so much of my time that, you know, it felt like, it was I definitely, and I relate to the sort of accommodate blow.
Yeah.
You would blow and then
Yes.
you're back to like, it's reality and so much is required that you can't help but like, there's not enough time to like reflect or think, let's pool our resources. What do we want to do?
Right.
Or nope, it's just sort of like the next morning you've got, you know, 3 kids to get ready and a full day and you've got, you know.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think along with that too is I don't know that I was meant to be a stay-at-home mom. So I'm at home and I have all the time in the world, but I just can't keep the house clean because it makes me feel miserable that's my only role. And it's interesting because I go back to school eventually. So I'm in school right now and I almost feel like now I have something that I feel like is very valuable to me. So then when I need to like take a break and clean something, it doesn't feel so terrible. But when that was the only thing that I was doing, it just felt soul crushing because it was like, this is it. Like, is this all that I have? Is this my whole life? And obviously I know that like parenting isn't just cleaning your house. And I really value like connecting with my kids and teaching my kids and talking to them about the things that are important to me. But so much of like the stay-at-home life was just really, really suffocating for me. And I think that I couldn't even like motivate myself to like be a really good housekeeper or, you know, like to do these certain things. And then I felt like I was just trash at it. And so I had several meltdowns that were not even directed at you, but you remember, and I was just like, why am I so bad at everything that I have to do? I feel like everything that I'm told to do, everything that is supposed to be the most important thing, I feel like I'm so bad at it. Why am I so bad at everything? And of course, I think it's because something's wrong with me. You know, like I'm not good at this. Yeah. And I've been geared my whole life that this is the most important thing and you need to be at home. And I'm just feeling completely suffocated by it. So it's just, it got to be
that is so powerful. It is so damaging. Mm-hmm. And on a level you feel it, what I hear kind of in that is you were like betraying parts of yourself that like really needed in the stay home default kind of thing. Mm-hmm. You were literally not able to honor yourself. Yeah. And that's why all of that, was true. And it's different if you give yourself a space of honoring, like going back to school or whatever, then you can come back to this home space because it's not defining you. Yes. You know what I mean?
Yes. That's why it was so suffocating. It's because I feel like that's all I had to define me. Yeah. And I think it's hard to, you know, when we talk about how the church plays into this is, you know, like we came from this place where we were like, no, we're going to be those people, you know, like we have to be these people. So I feel like I was just busting my butt to be palatable for the church and to like, you know, if I'm having issues with race, don't bring it up in Sunday school because then everyone will think you're that person and quit making it about race and she's so liberal. So I was also being very careful during this time to make sure that I'm not going to like be some like rabble rouser at church. Like we still need to be the people. And we were really those people in the church. We were like a ma and pa on trek twice, where we would like, you know, like you're over the group of kids. And then we would have like our little Pioneer kids come to our house like later and we'd have like a family reunion. And we were so involved. We were doing all the things in church. And I think, and some of it we loved doing because we always like working with the teenagers. But some of it, I feel like I was going along and doing this because I was still trying to be palatable and acceptable. And what you're saying, Margie, about like that it's a self-betrayal. And I don't realize this until like, like years down the road where I'm like, every time I do this and I keep my mouth shut, I'm actually like being inauthentic in this space. That's what this space has become for me.
Yeah.
And would that lead us to JFF, do you think?
Yeah. Yeah.
Jennifer Finlayson Fife.
Finlayson Fife.
She was a big, I'd say she was a big catalyst in us starting to discover some of these issues in our marriage.
Yeah.
You want to, for those, I mean, we've had our Mormon stories very early on, but do you want to tell our listeners who she is and how you heard about her?
Yeah, go ahead. You, I think.
I got really into her. So she's a PhD. She's a LDS sex therapist, and she is still active. So she's like believing active, but her content is so good. I'd recommend it to anybody. It's just good. She teaches good mental health principles. She teaches about embracing sexuality. I feel like it was through her that I learned a lot about, gender roles and patriarchal systems and how they harm intimacy. And so differentiation, which was something that was definitely lacking in our relationship. And so I kind of had always been like a little bit of a budding feminist, but I kind of like got on the fast track, I think, after a certain point. And yeah, Jennifer Finlayson Fife was a big part of that for me. And and then I listened to, so Julie Hanks is another LDS therapist that I was into. And then Kristen Hodgson is a sex therapist. And they all put out great content. And so, I just got really into
progressive Mormon women therapists.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And at one point I remember saying to Jeff, I was like, I've learned more in these podcasts than I've ever learned in general conference. Like, this is what I need to be knowing. Like, no one has ever talked to me about this. And these are really, really important topics. Why are we not talking about this? Like, this is what Relief Society should be about. Like, why are we not sharing and being vulnerable and talking about like systems of oppression? And so anyways, so I get into them. And so I kind of like take a turn and become sort of a progressive Mormon feminist, I guess, like at this juncture. So, I start really like digging into women's issues. And then, so there's two books that I read that were all really influential to me at the time. So Wendy Ulrich, do you know who that is? She wrote a book that I read and I was just really feeling it because she kind of had like a take on women and the priesthood. So she felt that women did have priesthood power and that they were, there were ways that we actually are using priesthood power. And she talked, like in her book, she talked about how in the early church, women were giving blessings and, setting apart women and how they would like do like kind of washings and anointings before a woman gave birth. So I was just like, I was so into this because I was like, yes, like, this is it. Like there has to be this. And during this time too, I think is when I started IDing the issues with the temple, because it wasn't, while we were going to the temple consistently, it was still that like I was covenanting to Jeff and then Jeff would covenant to God. The women were still veiling their faces. And so I start to ID things like this. And so I'm just eating up these like kind of these like feminist Mormon takes.
That was a huge mind opener for me when I heard about the dialogue article, I think called A Gift Given, A Gift Taken Away. When I learned that in the 1800s and early 1900s, like you say, women are not only giving blessings with oil for healing blessings with oil, priesthood blessings.
Yeah.
They're doing washings and anointings outside the temple in preparation for childbirth as a sacred religious ritual.
Yeah.
And then you learn it was taken away. Like, what the heck? We got worse?
Yeah.
We got worse?
Yeah.
And no one told me? That was outrageous, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
she has this hot take that I love where in her book, she talks about how, being born in the covenant, like when you're born into if you have LDS parents that, that are sealed, and then you're born, you're automatically sealed to them. So, like our kids are adopted. So we took them to the temple later and they were sealed to us. So our kids weren't born in the covenant. So if you're born to LDS parents, you automatically have an ordinance done. And her thing was that if a woman is like kind of like administering an ordinance through her body, like through birth. So even though I haven't given birth, I'm just totally feeling this. I was like, yes, women are like administering an ordinance, like they're doing this. And I feel like this is what I needed. I needed to feel like, no, this is what needs to happen. And we need to bring this back in the church. Like I kind of like moved into this space where I was like, we have to make it better. And it used to be more this way. And so like, that means that it could come back. And so women, like we need to understand our priesthood power and how we use it. And the church needs to like get right with it and like start ordaining women. So yeah. So Wendy Ulrich's one, and then Barbara Morgan Gardner is the other one. She has a book called Women in the Priesthood that I read, and it's also really good. And it's about how she thinks the kind of like the eternal order of priesthood is familial. So it's men and women presiding together. And that's what like the eternal priesthood is. And she would say like the hierarchical priesthood that exists on the earth is not going to be a thing in heaven. So she like really made a case for like men and women preside together, and that's the eternal way.
Which isn't what the Proclamation of the Family says.
It isn't. Right. But you know what's funny is just in this past conference, Elder Suarez gave a talk, and I think that I think this is hers. Like that's her. What he said was her take. You know how he was saying preside doesn't mean you're in charge. It means that you like teach. And that's her book.
Yeah,
like it's from her book.
For sure.
So, and I haven't heard it from other people. So I didn't listen to conference, but when I was hearing people talk about it, I was like, I think she's the one that like started this way of thinking, and now it's going to get used. Yeah. Now it's going to get used, and they're going to be like, no, we didn't ever say men preside. We said that preside doesn't mean preside. It means to teach. But yeah, that's hers.
The way the church changes its theology. It just slowly changes and then says it's always been that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so I'm in this full thing, and then I decide that I'm going to work at the temple because
that'll fix everything.
Yes.
That'll fix everything.
Well, again, this is me trying to think like I just need to have some of my own things, And so I was like, I'm going to work in the temple. It'll help me just have some time away. So this is kind of a funny thing. So
is Nashville temple or?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Nashville has a temple. So I go to my bishop and I'm like, hey, I want to serve volunteer in the temple. And he says, that's fine, except women who have minor children at home cannot be ordinance workers. It's been
men can,
but women can't.
Minor children at home.
So Jeff can like be an ordinance worker.
Oh gosh.
But I couldn't be an ordinance worker.
She can be the laundry though.
But they said you can volunteer in the laundry.
I kid you not, right?
So I'm just sitting there and I'm like, why is this way? And he's like, it's just because women are like so valuable in the home. And I was like, wait, I'm with my kids all day. Isn't it more valuable for him to be at home? Like this is in the evening, like there's just like evening sessions and stuff. So
I didn't know about that rule.
I also did.
They've actually changed it in the last couple of years.
In 2019, just barely. So he was like, you can volunteer in the baptistry and like help with laundry. And I'm just such a good person that I was like, fine, I'll go do. I'm not too good for laundry, so I was like, fine, I'll volunteer and do laundry in the baptistry. So I'm volunteering in the baptistry, and I brought it up with the temple president too. I was like, hey, I don't understand this policy. And same thing. He was like, well, like, like women are so valuable. And so like, they just want to protect their time away from home. But obviously it's fine if I go there and do the laundry. And he also said like being an ordinance worker is fairly like taxing. Like there's a lot to memorize. But I was like, no, the women don't speak when they're ordinance workers. The women don't say anything. They just have tasks that they do, but they don't say anything. So I was kind of like, okay, this just sounds to me like an archaic policy, and I'll just accept that it's archaic and I'll just do my thing. And then, so I did that for maybe I did it for a couple of years. I was like volunteering in the temple.
Can we just can we just recognize the fact that you're having this experience at home, you know, with this idea of like cleaning house, doing laundry, you're trying to create space for yourself.
And you go do
the next
laundry
place
at the
you
temple.
go, they're like, we have some laundry for you. Right? You're like,
Perfect fit, right? This will do the trick. This will do the trick.
No, I mean,
but you're valuable. It's because you're so
Right,
valuable that we would like for you to fold these towels.
I know.
Right.
It's just so, and the sad thing is that I just like keep going along with it, you know, like this is the power of like conditioning and like the indoctrination is that I'm just like, yeah, well, this is the best place for me to be. So I guess I'm just going to volunteer in the temple laundry. So
Truly. Yeah.
So that policy just barely changed in 2019. So that's an exciting move forward.
And so did that make everything better? I'm assuming
Yes,
it did. I'm
it
assuming
did.
that fixed it.
Yes, it fixed problems. Yeah. Oh my
So
gosh.
you're good now.
Yeah, so I'm good.
Story's over.
Yep, the end. Yeah.
Thank you for joining us today on Mormon Stories. Oh, wait, there's more? Wait.
So we, is there anything else that you want to add? Like, I know this is
I
not my
think
crisis,
during
but
during this time in the bishopric, I think is when I was exposed to the CES letter for the first time.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
I had been reading Rough Stone Rolling, which is an interesting thing. I had read it previously when we were in South Bend, and then I had read it again a few years ago. And you know, Rough Stone Rolling for me was so interesting because it gave me Joseph's treasure digging and all these things that you had heard about. It gave me a place to put them in a faith promoting enough light that I could build, I call it my house of cards, where I could put a place for everything. And it all was held together because I still thought the fruits of the church were where it was at. You know, the fruits were there, and the fruits were the thing that was the most important. So I remember seeing the CES letter, and I got it and I started reading it. And as you do, you start to feel sick inside. And it was like page 2. And so I said, oh gosh, that's the Spirit telling me that this thing is bad. And so put it away. And that's when, around that same time was when I stumbled upon the video of you and Jeremy Runnels interviewing. And I had never seen either of you, but the picture I had conjured in my mind of who John Dehlin was and who Jeremy Runnels was, that when I watched, and again, I watched probably 10 minutes of the video, and I remember the cognitive dissonance was so thick for me in thinking that, wait a minute, this isn't who I pictured these people being. And
Me or Jeremy?
Both.
Oh, okay.
Both. Absolutely both. Yes.
So like no horns.
yeah.
Yeah.
No swear words.
Yeah. I mean, it was just,
No pornography.
And I don't know what I envisioned in my mind, but I didn't get it. And
no weed.
Or like an evil like lawyer in a suit that's trying to like tear down. I don't know. Yeah.
But I think what that did, going through Rough Stone Rolling, is it made this house of cards, but it also made that very vulnerable to coming down too. I mean, I really do. I think that you have all of this information that, I mean, it always surprised me. I think Richard Bushman paints it in a very faith promoting light. I mean, I feel like he gives you explanations as a member to understand why Joseph Smith was treasure digging. Then when you really start to dig into that, you realize that, that's probably not what, I know he's probably worked this out, and I think he probably believes the way he's worked it out, but it's a stretch. All of it is a stretch, right? And especially when you get into the polygamy stuff. But again, it was good enough for me to have a place to put these issues and feel like they had their own little place in this thing, and it was all held up because the fruits of the church that I felt were good and that they were helping people to become like Christ. As you don't recognize, the shame and the guilt. And again, I hadn't come to terms with any of that. So
You said bishopric or stake high council by this point?
this is when I was in the bishopric. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so-
And it's funny. This is when the Gospel Topics essays came out, and one of the members of their bishopric.
No, it was our bishop who told us, he told us, we do not tell people to read these. They are not for public consumption.
They're not for public consumption.
Not for public consumption.
That's the.
If
what
someone's
he had
having a
gotten.
crisis, the church has made them so they can help them. And it was really funny because are
Wow, was that explicit? That
yeah,
they wanted to
It was-
and
that they're
that
not-
was
they're
not
not for
coming
the
from
members
that
to
was
read.
not coming from him. He was telling us
like
that
the area
as
guy.
what his training was, and then this was interesting because the guy who was our executive secretary, who was a friend of mine, and he was in that meeting, and he said he had known about the gospel topic essays, and he and I had talked about the CES letter, so he had known about that too, but he did the same thing I did, is he read a little bit and he's like, oh, this is obviously, I'm feeling really bad, so it's got to be the Spirit telling me it's bad. So he said when he heard that about the gospel topics essays, he went home and he read them, and that was the beginning of the end for him. So he's
him and
out,
his
but
family
that
left
was
the
but it was the
church.
gospel topics
It was the
essays that
gospel
kind of
topics
after
essays.
the bishop said these are not for public consumption. He's like, what's in them? So he goes home and
So yeah,
I have to make a quick announcement. I just found out this week that like the general authority over the Utah area presidency has just made a policy for all the missions in his area that the missionaries are not to read the book Saints, which is the church's
heard
own
that.
history book.
Oh,
But the church general authorities have decided that it's bad for Mormon missionaries to read the church's own approved biography of its own history.
oh my God.
I have heard of people struggling with reading Saints,
Yeah.
which
If you struggle reading Saints, then
yeah, oh, that's funny.
Okay, so that's fascinating that in the bishopric you're starting to get exposed, and maybe some cracks are forming. Is that fair to say, or not?
I don't think yet, no, but I think the foundation for the craft.
Okay. All right. Okay.
He's still pretty. He's
Again,
still
I call it a house of cards because I think I had this thing built up and everything had its place, and so that was in that way it was vulnerable.
And are you getting at all nervous about Larissa's, cracks and progressivism and wokeism growing as you're in this bishopric and watching her kind of unravel? At least that's how I'm seeing it. Are you getting nervous?
No, I don't think I perceived it as an unraveling as much as Larissa just being progressive, and that wasn't really overly concerning to me. I mean, I think at this point I was certainly getting more progressive too. You'd agree with that, right?
Yeah.
I think that I was doing a little bit of work myself and doing a little bit more reading and studying, not just church stuff, but outside of church things that was helping me.
Okay.
And I think as our kids got older too, I think that you and I saw more issues, or maybe you understood more what their experience was in the church, and I was just talking about it so much, and so I think that you started to move closer to where I was, even if we weren't totally in sync. Would you say that that's accurate?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And one thing that Jeff always said in the church is sometimes he would say, I know people say that the church has a messy history, but the fruits are good. So that was something that was very kind of central to his belief in the church, is that the fruits are good. What it's producing is good. That's how he perceived it, is that it was good. And so it was worth it. And we don't even need to dig into whatever.
Is it true?
Yeah. Is it true? Because the fruits of it were good.
Well, and I believed it was true. I think that is really important. I full on did. I believe that people weren't perfect. So you had imperfect history or imperfect things, but it didn't mean the church wasn't true, because the fruits were the real thing that showed you that it was true, right? Mm-hmm. So that was a big thing for me, and it also, I think, set me up for the crash too.
Okay. All right. So I think is the next step kind of Larissa's continued unraveling?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It keeps going. Yeah. So
maybe we should not call it unraveling.
Yeah.
Or enlightening. What do you want to call it, Margie?
Yeah.
What's your nomination?
Thank you, Margie.
Feel like it's unraveling.
What do you call it, Margie?
I feel like it's like coming into her own, exploring, giving herself some space to explore and learn and come to terms with things in her own
Yeah.
space and in her own way.
Argue wins the podcast for today.
Well, I think from the church's perspective, they would say it was an unraveling, right?
Yeah.
Just like,
And that's the terminology you're using, right?
So
John? It's from the perspective
from
of
a
the
from a church standpoint, but yeah, I think that's a very nice.
No, a lot of people get after me for calling it a faith crisis. They want to call it like a faith awakening, right? Or a faith enlightenment, not something negative. They want it framed in a positive way.
It does feel
Well,
like a
and it was
crisis,
funny
though.
at this time because I was on the High Council or was I Stake Young Men's? And Larissa was complaining that she never gets called, like she feels like she's kind of like just not
I felt invisible.
Yeah, invisible.
So
yes.
so I think that, Jeff is always in leadership. And then in addition to that, Jeff is very outgoing and he's very charismatic. And then he was pretty close with the members of the stake presidency. So one of them is still one of Jeff's best friends. It was our stake president for a long time. And we had a great stake presidency. And I think that they were pretty liberal and even with their own progressive views. And I think these are things that kind of maybe even kept us going for a little bit, is that it was like, no, I know that, like they also do this. And, the stake president's wife is the one that gave me the Wendy Ulrich book. And so, I think that it made me kind of feel like things can change because we have these progressive people in leadership. But I feel like for the longest time, I would, Jeff was serving in the bishopric, and then I would go to my temple recommend interview, and the bishop would just say like, "Oh, I'm so grateful for your husband. He does so much." So then my temple recommend interview is about Jeff. And then, I'll see a member of the stake presidency at stake conference, and they'll just be like, "Hey, I saw Jeff, Jeff is a cyclist." So they were like, "Oh, I saw you had a really good ride yesterday." And after a while, I was like, I'm so sick of talking about Jeff all the time. My whole life revolves around him, and you're delightful. But honestly, it gets to the point where it's like, I'm invisible. Nobody cares. And I sometimes think when you're a stay-at-home mom, people don't know how to talk to you because, they can be like, "Oh, how are the kids?" And you're like, "Oh, they're good." And they don't really know that you might have other interests, outside of your kids. And so I really felt like I was kind of invisible. And I think I said this at one point to Jeff where I was like, "It doesn't matter. I'm just an appendage of you in the church. I'm just here to be your, trophy wife while you're serving on the High Council." So then shortly after that, I was called to be the Relief Society president in our ward. So
was that as a way to,
this is my moment.
Was that as a way to rescue you, or do you think they just didn't know?
No, I don't think so. And we had a black bishop, and I was feeling him, and he's a great guy. We love him, and he became the stake president shortly after that. So we had a black bishop, and there's not very many black bishops or black stake presidents in the United States. So this was a huge deal for me.
In the South, no less.
Yes.
In the Confederacy, in Dixie.
Yes. And he is he's fantastic. So, to this day, I don't have bad things to say to him. So I'm just feeling him, and I'm just like, yes, my kids are going to see black leadership, and this is going to be good.
Oh,
and again, these are all things that I'm like, yeah, the church is changing, we're going to make it better, and this is what it needs to be. And this is what the restoration is all about, is that we need to get it to where it should be, which is the way that I thought it should be. So anyways, this was really out of the blue. And so, because I feel like I had been a young women's president twice. I taught early morning seminary. I had just come off of being the primary chorister, which was actually really fun, and I had a good time with the kids. But so he called me in, and it was just a total shock. And so I think I was laughing when he was like, "We want to call you to be the Relief Society president." So I was laughing.
No, I was laughing first because he brought me in first. And he told me he was going to call her, and I started laughing. And he said, "I've never had that reaction before." And I said, "Well," and then they brought Larissa, and he told her, and she started laughing too. And so it was really, because we had just had this conversation that she's invisible.
I was like, I'm invisible in the church. And so So I told him, I was like, I don't know that I'm Relief Society president material. Like, I feel like I have views that are, you know, like are a little like off the beaten path or whatever. So I don't know. And he said to me, he said, I think that's why you should be the Relief Society president. So I think him, and with his standpoint, like he's coming in as a black man in the church, I think that this is something that he valued, which was very nice for me to experience, where he said, no, the fact that you feel like you're not a classic Relief Society president, that's why you should be a Relief Society president.
Can I just say, like,
Yeah.
this is happening more and more. I have a friend, I won't say his name because he's in a mixed faith marriage. He's also married to a biracial Asian woman.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't want
That's
to
funny.
out him. But anyway, he lost his faith completely, went and told his bishop, and he got called into the bishopric. He's like, wait, you don't understand. I don't believe at all. And the bishop said the same thing. It's like, that's why we want you, because you're going to be extra useful to all the people hemorrhaging as the church loses their faith. And he served for a couple of years, but it was like toxic to his soul.
gosh.
Oh, I bet.
Because he had to get up and, you know, conduct every third week and bear testimony. And it became
count
like
tithing. Oh,
bad
my
for his
gosh.
mental health. But
Yeah.
he did it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's funny. And I don't know that like people in my ward knew that I had like that I was formulating some beliefs that even were kind of like outside the realm of what was okay for, you know, even LDS people. Because at this time I was starting to get like very attached to like, it's not right for us to just pray to a male. If we believe that there are like heavenly parents, then it's not right for us to pray to just the man. And so I was like telling our kids, like, you should be praying to either Heavenly Mother or to heavenly parents. But just praying to a man, I just can't get behind that because it enforces this like patriarchal view. So, and
Can you just imagine the Relief Society president teaching to pray to Mother in Heaven? Like, what the?
but hey, I still knew my place. I still knew like you say that at home, you don't bring that to church. So I kind of like knew how to separate or kind of compartmentalize those things. So I get called to be the Relief Society
Margie,
president.
she just said, I still knew my place. Did I catch that?
That was, I know it's sad.
No, it's, I mean,
Sad,
it's
but
true.
it's true in the church. Yeah. Like I kind of knew like, don't make people too uncomfortable. So I start off as the Relief Society president. We thought Jeff would get released from the High Council because there was kind of this thing where they were like, we don't want to overtax families. And so we don't have two people be, you know, like in high demand callings at the same time. But they didn't release Jeff. And
Well, they released me as a stake young men's president and then called me the High Council. Remember that?
oh yeah.
Which is just disciplinary councils and then talks once a month.
A couple months later, yeah. So they released me as one thing, and then a couple months later called me to the other.
I think the hard thing, though, about being on the High Council outside of Utah is that Jeff was driving into Kentucky to visit the ward that he was over. And so it felt he was just gone again. And so like he would have like speaking engagements, but then he was supposed to go to his ward council twice a
Larissa's
month.
still the
Yeah, so I'm the
president.
Relief Society president, and so I'm still. I think at this point we were kind of like, I need to go to ward council. Can you get the kids ready? And then sometimes he would like bring the kids to me at church, and then he would drive to his thing. So we were just at this point we're like all over the place because now he's sometimes like driving to Kentucky, and we're trying to get our kids where they need to be. And at this point, our son is, you know, in the deacon's quorum. And so sometimes he's supposed to be there preparing the sacrament. So we just are like really navigating like a really hectic situation on Sunday mornings. So I feel like I actually had a fairly good experience as the Relief Society president. And it's because I had a really supportive bishopric, and I had, and I don't think they were not liberal, like politically liberal, but definitely a little bit church liberal. So our bishop that called me, who is black, he got called to be our new stake president, and then there was a new bishopric called, and so then I was serving under a different bishop, but he was really big into like making sure women are being heard and having their place. So when I was first like serving under him, he was like, hey, we'd like you to sit on the stand. So he wanted like female leadership to be on the stand with the bishopric. So for a little bit, again, these are all things that were making me be like, no, yes, like we're going someplace, like we're going in the right direction. So, but it was kind of funny because I would sit on the stand sometimes, and when you do, people are always like, why are you here? It's like nobody else like knows or is aware. So they're just like, why are you sitting up here? And I'm like, I don't know why I'm sitting up here. And then, but it was tricky too, because Jeff wasn't there very often. And so I was like, well, someone has to sit with our kids. And so I did it for a little bit. And then I was like, no one's sitting with my kids at church. Yeah. They're just like sitting there on their own, and like, they're going to start fighting with each other. So it was a good thought, but it didn't last super long. But I think that was kind of like his thing. And he sent out a thing with Ward Council, and it was how important it is to listen and validate women and giving them the space to say their thing in Ward Council. And I was kind of on this kick in Relief Society that I hated for the Relief Society to do things that were like very heavily female gendered. So I was like, why are we always cleaning up after a thing? Or why do we coordinate the food for the Christmas activity? Like, I'll set up the tables and chairs. Like, I can do that. Like, why don't the men do this? And so, and I think we had a very receptive ward to that. So I think that I actually had a pretty good experience because I had leadership that was very supportive of me, and they kind of were on the same page with that. And at one point, I was talking to our bishop, and he had wanted to call somebody to a Relief Society calling, and she didn't want to do it. And so he was talking to me about this, and he said, where do you think she would like to serve? And I was like, well, I don't know, like she's young, so maybe she would like to be in the Young Women's. And he was like, yeah, that's a good idea. And then he said, if you ever have any other thoughts about other callings in the ward, let me know, because we value your opinion and would like to hear that as a part of our revelation process. So I really was like, I was like really feeling it, that I felt valued, and I felt like I could kind of shape my experience and do my thing. And so
sounds like a dream. It's a progressive Mormon dream.
So unique. So
it was very unique. Yeah.
Exceptional.
Yes.
Can you imagine if the church had treated us this way, Margie?
Yeah. I still think, and I think that the dangerous thing about that is that these things can happen and you can almost think like, oh, it's changing. But I think for me, I started to realize like, this is systemic. Mm-hmm. Like patriarchy is a system. It's not a person. It's not a few little things. It's a system of organizing. And so you can have bishops that will put a Relief Society president on the stand or do these different things, but it really doesn't change the core of who has authority and who can influence and really make changes in the church and who is represented, right? Or whose views are represented. And so it's good, but it's also, it's very limited. So I think it almost gave me a false sense of like, we're going in the right direction, but that was just one bishop one time.
Yeah. And
it definitely, that's not how it is from the top down.
Yeah.
And so I think that kind of appeased me for a little bit because I was just really feeling it. Mm-hmm. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you served Relief Society president for how long?
So a couple years, and let's see, I bet it was like 2.5 years. And yeah.
You got breast cancer.
Yeah. And then I was Relief Society president through COVID. So probably a year before COVID, and then we did our COVID year, and then
really quick, we haven't covered that so much. There was always this realization as COVID started really advancing that the church might lose a lot of people to COVID because they got used. All of a sudden, they don't have to go to church, home church, staying home, and they're going to get used to staying home, realize they like staying home, and then they're not going to go back.
Yeah.
Do you have any? We haven't really covered.
Yeah.
So do you have any COVID reflections as Mormons?
COVID was a big thing for us. So maybe before we jump into that, though, you and I came to a head.
Oh yeah, do that.
about our thing. Yeah. So I want to tell one quick story really quick about wearing pants to church, because this should not be a thing, but it is a thing. Like, though, like wearing pants to church is a thing, and it's ridiculous, but it is. So when I was the Relief Society president, I had a friend in the ward, and she also was like very progressive, very nuanced in the church. And there was a girl that was a new convert, that was a teenager that had just joined the church. So she had just gotten baptized, and she was going to like do youth baptisms for the first time. And she said, can I wear like dress pants? She wore like nice dress pants to church when she came. She just was like, I'm not into dresses. I've never worn dresses. And so, my friend was kind of working with her, and, like their family was fellowshipping her. And so she was like, can I wear pants to the temple? And I think they had called the temple, and I think they said it was okay. Like, as long as it was her like nice clothing, that it was fine. And so her and I were having this conversation, and she said, she was like, I think we should be wearing pants to church, because we're telling this girl, it's okay. It doesn't matter. Like, you wear what's right for you and what's respectful to church. But like, why do none of us ever wear pants to church? It's because they kind of have been like stigmatized, or, like people kind of associated it with like, these are liberal feminists if you wear pants to church. So she was like, I think we need to wear pants to church. And I said, yeah, I'm with you. Except I'm just going to run it by the bishop, because I'm the Relief Society president, and I don't want him to think I'm liberal. And she said to me, but aren't you liberal? And I was kind of like, yes, but I don't want people to know that, And so in the end, I was just like, no, you're right. Like, I just need to, if I feel like it's okay to wear pants to church, I'm just going to wear pants to church. And it's silly that it was such a big deal. But it was a big deal. Mm-hmm. And I think this is sort of me starting to step out of like being palatable for everybody in the church and saying like, no, I'm going to do the thing. And maybe somebody might think that I'm going off the rails, but I'm just going to do it anyways. So as the Relief Society president, I started wearing pants to church. And it was to make a statement. Like, I was trying to say like, this doesn't matter. I'm still like dressed nice. I'm still doing this thing. And so I don't know, it maybe seems insignificant, but for me, I think it was like a step for me to say, you don't have to be everyone's cup of tea. You can just do your thing and even make some people unhappy. But
I love that. It doesn't seem insignificant at all.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
And you might lose your feminist card if you ask the bishop for permission to wear
right.
pants.
That was my first reaction, though. I was like, let me just run it by the bishop, though, because I don't want him to think I'm going off the rails.
It is. It is so
like,
crazy
really?
that we even have to like think that, though.
In what
right?
year?
Ask
it
permission for what we wear.
Just
Yes.
so
In
crazy.
what year? 2021 or 2020 or whatever?
And I think this is what happens when, even when women have authority in the church, you still have to defer to, you will always have a male leader over you. Mm-hmm. And obviously this had been so heavily conditioned to me that I was like, well, let me just check with the male leader that's in charge of me. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just silly. So we were kind of at a place in our life where I'm just kind of like with the kids, trying to find my place. And I started to kind of think like, I need something that's just mine. Like I was identifying like, I think that my life has revolved around Jeff, and everywhere we lived there because it was Jeff's job, and we went into debt for Jeff's medical school, and we made sure that he could, have all the opportunities that he needed to for his career. And then of course my life revolves around my kids, and it just came to kind of a breaking point. And I was starting to kind of look around for like, I need something, like I need something of my own. So I was looking into like, should I just volunteer at like a nonprofit that I feel strongly about? And then I started thinking like, no, I actually think it might be important to me to make some money like of my own. That's just, like I felt so economically dependent on Jeff. I honestly felt economically vulnerable. Like if something happens, like I think that I'm smart and I could learn things, but I don't have a job history. I don't have really job skills. I don't have a degree. And so I just felt extremely vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And so I also was looking around at maybe doing a small something. Like I was like, maybe I'll get certified for phlebotomy because, I had done my EMT thing before, or should I like learn how to be an x-ray tech or something? So I was just kind of trying to think like, what is something that I could do that's just little? So I don't want to disrupt my family. I don't want to disrupt my kids or anything. I just want to have a little something that's mine. So I was kind of in that space, but again, we're listening. I'm way deep into these podcasts, and
the feminist women.
yes, and they're all believing and active. Yeah, but I'm deep in them. So at one point, Jennifer Finlayson Fife she said, she was like, I'm going to do a Facebook Live, and we're going to talk about resentment in marriage. And so I was like, oh yeah, that will probably be a good one. And again, I don't think it was till then that I really like identified like I have a lot of built up resentment toward Jeff about the way that our life has kind of shaped itself. And so, so I listened to this. I listened to the first part of it and I was like, oh no, this is really good. And so then I think I stopped it and then I waited till that night and I said, we need to listen to this together. Yeah. So we both listened to this and I think it was really centered on that we accept this kind of patriarchal structure where like the man is the focal point and the woman just is taught to like, orbit or defer or, we're just always taught to like put our own needs, to be a good, righteous woman, you have to put your own needs to the side and you always have to be managing the needs of others. So she just hit on a lot of really good things. And I feel like it just hit me really hard that I was like, we accepted a system or a structure for our marriage. And I don't think that I understood it. And so I don't actually feel like I chose it. I don't feel like I chose it. And right now I don't like it and I'm not happy with it. And so I'm rejecting it now. And so we kind of like came to this spot and I had been just like struggling, like doing the thing with the kids and trying to find my place. And I think it was at that point that I remember breaking down and crying and saying to you, like, I actually think I'm very unhappy. And it's hard because I know that like our life has there's so many areas where we are privileged and, like Jeff is a high earner and he has a good career. And so, part of me is like, what do you have to be upset about? Like, just like you can, like you have so much privilege in your life, but it was the structure that we were living in was not something that I chose. And it wasn't something that felt good or authentic to me anymore. And I think that this was the thing that kind of like finally made me identify it. And so I was like, it was the first time I was like, I'm unhappy. Like I'm unhappy with this.
Yeah,
Jeff,
that's powerful.
And Jeff, what was that like for you? Were you nervous?
Yeah, it's not fun. I mean, it wasn't a fun conversation, but I think it was nice because I think this was the beginning of me starting to realize that these things, it wasn't about living the gospel more to fix these problems, right? I mean, that wasn't going to be the solution here. And I think that was a big turning point, I guess, for us in our relationship is recognizing the problem. And I think that was a big part of us then moving forward. And it's a long road and we're still on that road. But yeah, certainly that was the beginning.
And I think this was the first time too that we identified, you kind of hear about like, oh, patriarchy is bad or these things. But I think that we started to dig into like what the structure looks like, like this is an actual system and this is how it identifies itself. And patriarchy is bad for women and it's bad for men because it creates hierarchy in relationships. And so we kind of were identifying that this thing that the church sold us, that this was the way and this was this is how you set up your marriage so that it's most successful. I think it was the first time we had actually pointed the finger at the church and said, you sold us this, and it actually creates hierarchy between men and women, and it harms intimacy and relationships. would you say that was kind of like, maybe
Yeah.
it wasn't that developed, but that was the first time we were like,
That was the beginning
the
of it,
church
yeah.
told us this, and now I'm unhappy because I did the thing that they told me to do. And I think we were doing it about as good as you can do it in the church. But in the end, it's still, I was like, this didn't pan out. Like it's like, this is no good. It's not good for us.
Yeah.
Jeff?
We were doing the formula, yeah, but the result was not
Yeah.
The fruit.
what they told us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The fruit was not what you had anticipated.
Yeah.
What happens when the great plan of happiness doesn't make you happy?
Yeah.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the hard thing about when you start digging into understanding systems of oppression is once you start to understand like that this is well defined and there's characteristics of it, it's you will start IDing it all over the place. And so I think that then we start being in a place with the church where we start seeing issues happening all over the place because of this structure. And I think that the patriarchal structure, my personal belief is that it is so foundational to the church. I think it's almost like more, it's how they set up their power structure. I think it's almost more foundational than almost anything else. I just think it's so key to like how the church has functioned. And so I think once I was understanding that, it kind of made me feel like my Mormon feminism might be a dead end because, you know, like you can have these things happen in your ward and you can be feeling good, but is it changing? You know, the structure is so ingrained and there's so much hierarchy in the way that the upper levels of the church functions. So it really makes you think like, are we ever really gonna get there?
And so this led into COVID. You know, we're kind of in this little area, and then COVID comes, and the 2020 election comes, and I think both those things were a crack also for me. Seeing members of the church line up behind Donald Trump was really hard for me. I mean, and not to try and make a political thing, but for me it was really challenging because I see what we idealize as moral, and I did not see that in him. And it wasn't just, I mean, so that was a challenge. And then when COVID came and I see people who, it's not just saying they're not going to wear masks, but saying the Spirit told them that they don't need to get vaccinated, or the Spirit told them that they don't need to wear masks. And as a physician, that was challenging on so many levels, because if we believe that we have this Holy Spirit and we have a bigger portion of the Spirit than everyone else, it just seems crazy to me that you're receiving, the Spirit's telling you something different than it's telling me, or that it's telling them, or that it's telling, you know, our supposed prophet. And that was a really big thing for me to start to say, wait a minute, what is the Spirit? And why, and if it's telling people different things, or we're interpreting it different ways, then is it doing any good? And so that was definitely something that certainly didn't break my faith, but it was, again, another beginning of a crack for me to going down the road, you know, that started that path.
I think COVID was a huge thing for you because, yeah, just from you, I mean, Jeff's working as a doctor during this time, and he was still working in an urgent care. They were like seeing people that were coming in with COVID symptoms even before we kind of knew how contagious. So it was a scary time for us. And to have people, you know, kind of disregard or latch on to conspiracy theories, I feel like I just remember you were so frustrated. It was so hard to watch it go down.
Yeah, it was really, really challenging. And then it was during that time that George Floyd happened, and that was a big thing for me too. I think that was a real turning point for me from a racial perspective.
Now there's going to be, let's just say, Orthodox Mormons or people newly questioning who are going to think of Black Lives Matter as a bad thing. You know, they're going to say Blue Lives Matter, or All Lives Matter, or Black Lives Matter is a liberal conspiracy. Maybe talk about whether it's your kids or other things that made you look at the George Floyd thing differently than other Orthodox Mormons might.
Right. Well, I think that, so I know that there has been there's questions about the Black Lives Matter organization. But Black Lives Matter is an organization and it's a movement. And so, I feel like you can even say, like, I'm not sure, about the organization, but I think it's very important to understand what it is as a movement, because it is a movement. And Black Lives Matter exists to point to a systemic issue. And so, obviously everybody knows that all lives matter, but historically Black lives have mattered less. And those things have been, heavily built into, how this country has functioned and other places. So you've got issues with the Reconstruction after the Civil War. You've got the Jim Crow laws. There's huge discrepancies in healthcare, that for Black people. And then you've got these systemic issues with policing that that they've looked into it and seen, and that they're finding yes, this is something that looks like it's cultural. And so this is how I interpret Black Lives Matter, is that we're identifying an issue and everybody thinks that all lives matter, except that they don't, because historically Black lives have mattered less. And so this is a way to point to an issue and say we have to do better. And so for me, it's very offensive when somebody says all lives matter, because it's a way to invalidate something that a community has gone through for decades and decades. So obviously this is a very, very important movement to me. And so that's why I think it's important, is because it's a way to validate this is what Black people are experiencing. And I know that some people are like, well, that was in the past, so let's move on. But nobody can move on if you are just continually traumatized, right? Mm-hmm. So if they're still being traumatized, no one acknowledges what has happened. There's no, apologies, or there's no, then how do we move on? From a therapy standpoint, how do you move on if you're just continually being both invalidated and traumatized? And so that's how I view this movement and why it's so important. It's to validate and say yes, these lives have been undervalued, and now we're saying that they value as much as everybody else's do.
And Jeff, how is it for you, as still in a stake high council, or, as still a more orthodox believer than Larissa? Is there anything you want to add to how you processed George Floyd and Black Lives Matter?
Well, I think it spurred me to do some reading. I read several books at that time, and I think it really helped me to get. Yep, yeah, I did. I did read that, and White Fragility I read, which I thought was very good. And I know people will get worked up about that book, but I think it's very true. These are things that it's so easy when you're living in a privileged position to not think about and to not worry about, and so it was good. I felt like it was a paradigm shift for me, and it was also a way that I could then empathize, and it makes it different when you have Black children, and also coming to this perspective, realizing that maybe living the gospel isn't enough, right? That's there's more that has to be done if we're going to change this, and so that I think that was an important moment for me, and I think COVID was the underlying thing of, all of this, seeing all of this act out, and then the two sides of this issue, and the conspiracies and the misinformation was just so disheartening to me, and so difficult to be a healthcare professional and be watching this happen all around us, in members of the church and just people in our community. Just craziness. And some of the, patients and also members asking me questions and assuming that I'm anti-vax, or just the different things that we get was really challenging.
Okay.
And then I think doing church at home was another thing that was helped us to once we had those Sundays, they were so good. And I feel like we had the best church we've ever had was our home church. It was
a magical time.
It really was.
Oh, we loved it. And then so we're at home with our kids, and I've never been. I know that some people like really love the Tabernacle Choir, and I just don't love churchy music like that. And so we were at home, and I was like, I'm gonna play these guys a song that like I really love, or I don't know, like so I'm like, we're gonna play our music that I feel like is like hits my spirit, and then we're just teaching them the gospel according to Jeff and Larissa. And we're just at home, and it was such a healing time for us. And I think that was eye-opening for a lot of people, because all of a sudden we had like a chance to sit back and be like, oh, okay, like once I'm out of this hamster wheel, then I can have a chance to breathe and look around and say like, what am I doing? Like, what are we doing with this?
Yeah, the hamster wheel is that's a good metaphor. It really was. I mean, we had never had Sundays multiple in a row where we did not have to be at church, or at least for me, church for 6, 8, 10 hours, or Larissa stressed out about, and it was like so nice. It was, I mean, having those Sundays was just really, really.
It was a gift.
A gift, and really great, yeah.
And it's sad because, I mean, some people really struggled in COVID because they didn't have support or because they lost their job. So I understand that us loving the COVID time is also a privileged position, because Jeff was still able to work. And even though it was stressful, he was still working. There were people that, lost their jobs and couldn't pay their rent. And so, I feel sort of bad saying like it was a nice time, because I know that for some people it was devastating. But
it was nice on Sundays at least.
But it was. I'm just saying, because we kind of have this level of privilege, it was actually really nice for us. So
we have friends who worked in ER rooms, or even psychiatrists for whom COVID was really brutal, just super heavy and intense.
Yeah.
Was it that way for you as a sports?
Oh, yes. So our clinic does primary care, and then we have urgent care, and then I do our orthopedic stuff for all that. And so, I mean, for the first few months, my business went way down, and I was seeing a lot of primary care things. We were seeing them outside, because that was before we knew much about, the virus. And so we were actually seeing patients outside, trying to be as safe as we can, wearing masks, and it was a stressful time. I mean, it was, and I say that again, stressful, not comparing to a lot of people but it was stressful in healthcare, and not knowing, and then having people. I feel like there was a big loss of trust through COVID for healthcare, and we felt that. I mean, people who at the beginning were like so grateful, and then by the end, like coming in and telling me that I don't know what I'm talking about. I mean, that's a really that was a very interesting thing to go through. And it's funny, because even last week I had a patient in my office who was telling me about, I don't know, this is what he told me. I don't know if you've gotten the vaccine, but if you want my advice, don't get it. He's like, it's going to, and he starts listing off all the things it's going to do to me. I said, oh, I'm already all vaccinated, so we're well past that. But he comes in to get my professional advice, medical advice, and then proceeds to give me his medical advice about the vaccine. And so that's just, kind of par for the course.
That's funny.
I think another thing that was hard for us watching church members is that, at the beginning of COVID, everybody was kind of losing their minds, and, there was like kind of hoarding of supplies. And it's funny because, like I grew up in the church before, like the year 2000, when there was tons of pressure to have your supply of food and have food storage. And so I was kind of like, Mormons, this is our moment. Like, you should be live off your food storage. Don't get in a fight with someone at Costco over toilet paper. And then you could even take the money that you're saving from since you're living off your food storage, and you could give it to people who lost their jobs in COVID. I was like, isn't this what it was for? Like, isn't this what they told us to like have the food storage for, was for emergencies? But I feel like there was still like the members were just like everybody, like everyone was just kind of freaking out, not knowing what to do. And I was kind of like, shouldn't this be our moment when we're like, okay, it's all right. We're prepared. Like, we know what to do. And we've got this because we were taught to be prepared, and we have resources, and we have a year's supply of food. And so we're good. But we were just like everybody else, like it was just, I was like, oh, this isn't our moment. It's just crazy. But it was a crazy time. But so George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor are all killed. And up to this point, I have tried to really talk to my kids about, like what, as much as I can, teach them about, I'm trying to connect them to their community. But I have not talked to my kids about police brutality because I know that I have to. Every parent to a Black child knows you have to have like the talk with your child about like, what do you do if you get pulled over? Like, make sure it's well lit, start your camera going, like be as pleasant as you can. So like, there's things that you have to tell your child when you have Black children. And so I had not talked to my kids about this yet because I hate them knowing that they're going to be targeted for something that is just 100%, has to do with their skin color. But this is such a big deal, and it hit us so hard that we were both like, and we're kind of like more in sync at this point. And so we were like, we have to talk about this. So this was a really, really heavy thing for us and our family, was the protesting that was happening. And just, and I think that the thing that was so hard for me is that we had so many members of our ward who were posting things online that were just terrible.
Can you give examples?
I mean, just saying like, I can't believe these thugs are out like protesting, and like, well, George Floyd shouldn't have been doing this, and then this wouldn't have happened to him, and so just completely invalidating and saying like, yeah, this is like so like them, or and I know that the protesting I know it was rough. I know that there was like scary things that happened that summer with the protests, but to me, I was like, this is a community that is just reeling from like trauma after trauma after trauma. And so like, you have to look at this and say like, what is going on? And instead people were like, of course they're just trashing their communities. And so I'm just hearing people, post these things and say these things. And, and somebody in my ward posted and said like, if you support these types of things, I don't know how you can even get a temple recommend, and so I think that this was a time where you and I start saying, I don't think this is our community anymore. Like, we actually felt like the church was not our community. And so even though, we talk about this and we say like the church, that's one of the benefits of the church, that maybe even if the truth claims aren't true, it's still a community until it's not your community. And then it's very, very toxic and harmful.
Yeah, I think Bill Reel may have said once, you go from it's true and good to, well, maybe it's not true, but it's still good.
Yeah.
But then what happens when you get to, well, it's actually not so good.
Right.
At least for you or from your perspective.
Yeah.
Then it's neither true nor good.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And at this point, we've already had a few like small instances of like, microaggressions or like racial profiling with our kids. And so now I'm thinking like, I'm supposed to take them to church with these people, who are like, like, oh, these thugs, like, what are they doing? I'm like, how can I send my kids to church with these people who feel this way and don't understand like that this is so important to us? And then like, how do I send my kids to BYU? Or, like, how do we be a part of this space when these things that are important to them and to other people and to other, like other marginalized groups, like if they're just going to be invalidated, then how do we be in that space? And it was like that around that same time that the manual, the Come Follow Me manual, it was that lesson that was on skin color. And so we're like trying to do Come Follow Me at home with our kids. And then it's that lesson about, the skin and their skin was cursed. And so I'm trying to explain this to my kids, and I'm just like,
For those who don't know, explain
yeah.
just a little more about what was said in the Come Follow Me manual.
so I mean,
They had meant to take out a part talking about the curse of the Lamanites when the Nephites became wicked and God put a curse upon them
In the Book of Mormon.
In the Book of Mormon. And so they had dark skin from that point forward. And so there was a part in Come Follow Me, I think it was taking an excerpt out of a talk reiterating that this was a skin, and they're trying to change that it's not the skin, it's the countenance. So I think that's what it was.
Yeah, so I think in the last years they're trying to move away from this rhetoric that it was, that their skin was a curse. That skin color is a curse from God. And so, but it still found its way into the manual. And so
Because it was church doctrine for 200 years.
Oh yeah. And I'm sure whoever's sitting there like writing the manuals, it's just like, Jim that works at the church office building, because he has like his worldview, he doesn't identify that this is problematic. And so it gets into the church manual, even though they've kind of tried to change the rhetoric around it, but it still comes back. So it still is back. And so again, this was just very frustrating that I was like, this is still happening, and how much longer will it happen? And this is happening at the same time that I'm listening to people invalidate the experience of the Black community and what they're going through with this consistent like police brutality issue. And so I think for both of us at this time, we were just like, it's too much. Like, it's just not this. I don't think this is our place. And I think that we weren't even like, let's leave the church. I think we were like, you know what? This is fine that we go to church here, but these aren't our people. So it was almost like we had made the separation that like, I don't think this is our community anymore.
And were you still in the state high council?
I was, yeah. Matter of fact, during this same time, we had a disciplinary council, and before it started, there was this chatter going on from some of the older guys on the high council about lining up the Democrats and just killing them because they're no different than communists. I mean, this was kind of the rhetoric in the room, and I just, these
are men that are about to sit and judge somebody in a high, in a disciplinary council. So, it's like you think that we need to line up. You're conservative, and so you think that the other side is wrong, and so we should line them up and kill them. But you think that you're fit to sit in a room, in a room and judge somebody else for their righteousness. It was rough. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, Jeff's still on the high council, and I'm still the Relief Society president at this point. So we have COVID, which was just a rocky time. Good for us to be at home, but it was a rocky time. We've got the summer where you have all this like racial protesting, and then the election was just a total mess. And there were people just very divisive, and it just felt so toxic. It was very hard, and it wasn't just general. It was also like people within our ward that had very strong opinions that were saying certain things. It just was a really kind of a yucky time, I think.
Okay. So I guess this is wrapping up kind of part 2.
I think so.
I guess in part 3, we're going to be talking about you getting breast cancer.
Yes.
We're going to be talking about your son coming out as gay. Mm-hmm. We're going to be talking about your kind of full-on faith crisis, right?
Yeah.
And the sexual dysfunction that I think is a big part of that.
Yeah.
Is how, the focus on
we dealt with that.
Yeah.
How your breast cancer leads to some heavy, intense conflicts around sexual dysfunction.
Yeah.
That you guys have to work through.
Yeah. So we, all of us were having a crappy year in 2020, and it was just like, we're ready to let's just like close the door on this and let's start 2021. So yeah, so in late December is I'm diagnosed with breast cancer. So that was like a way just to like, it's just a last punch in the face, like from 2020. Yeah. I was like, of course. And we can, and I don't know if we want to
We can talk about that next time.
Yeah, so we can start with that and give more details. But yeah, that's how we ended our 2020 year. After all of this, it was like,
Man.
here's
So
one more, here's one
intense.
more punch. Yeah. So yeah, that's going to lead us into a full thing. So.
Well, Margie, how cool is parts 1 and 2 been?
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, well, we're so grateful again you would fly all the way here from Nashville, Tennessee and spend all day with us, and we're going to do a little bit tomorrow morning. So
Yeah, it's been great.
we're going to do one of those 8-hour Mormon stories.
Yeah.
Maybe 9. But sometimes the story merits that. So thank you so much, Larissa and Jeff Kindred, for all you've shared. This so much is actually newish to our audience.
Yeah.
From the biracial children to the Japanese American biracial experience to just the unique combination, your feminist awakening with progressive Mormonism. We've covered a lot of progressive Mormon men, but we haven't covered the progressive Mormon woman experience.
Yeah.
And this whole progressive Mormon Relief Society president wearing pants to church, like that's all new territory for Mormon stories.
Yeah, the themes.
these are good
You are
themes.
bringing the themes.
I do want to end with this. This may be a hard question, but so for many years in the early years of Mormon stories, I was trying to help partner with others to lead a progressive Mormon movement. I started a website called StayLDS.com. I helped start StayLDS website. The Waters of Mormon Facebook group started out as a StayLDS Facebook group that I started. I brought Dan Witherspoon on to do Mormon Matters podcast, and then I got excommunicated. And then I saw people like Thomas McConkie and Patrick Mason and Spencer Fluman and a bunch of white guys become like the new figureheads of progressive Mormonism. But it's been really, really interesting just in the past year or two to see Jennifer Finlayson Fife, Julie DeAzevedo Hanks, and others become in many ways the modern face of progressive Mormonism. But that's also led to sort of DesNat reactions and just, they've become in many ways the new targets of ultra-Orthodox conservative. And I guess, they may or may not face the day of reckoning. I know Julie Hanks' husband's the bishop, and JFF, Jennifer seems safe because she's still faithful in her ward. But they're going to get more and more pressure, and it's interesting to see women rising up as the leaders of progressive Mormonism, and there might be backlash.
I think so.
Yeah.
But what they're doing is so important. I mean, for church members to have someone saying this that's faithful, I think is just really, because if they left, all of their credibility would be gone. And I'm not saying they should stay. That's completely up to them. But I'm just saying I think it's really important that we have people that are in the church who are saying the messages they're saying, because it's.
I do think it's interesting that this, like the rise of kind of like the progressive Mormon women, is coming from the mental health field.
Except for Natasha.
Yeah. Well, do you know what? And this is my own hot take. So I don't know if people will think this is okay, but I think Natasha, we actually really followed closely her excommunication, and it affected me. It was very upsetting to me because I was so into these women that were, like teaching good mental health principles, teaching women to embrace their sexuality. And so it was very upsetting for me to watch the church go after Natasha Helfer, because I was like, no, these are the people that I feel like are healing me, that are like helping me to heal from some of the wrongs of the church. And are you going to take this person down? And I know that Natasha is, Julie Hanks and Jennifer Finlayson Fife are fantastic, but they also are they look like nice traditional Mormon women. I think that they are careful in how, I know that they say things that ruffle feathers, and I know Julie Hanks especially gets a lot of hate online, and there's people that are like, whenever someone leaves the church, I guarantee you they've been following Julie Hanks, they'll kind of pin it on her. But sometimes I wonder, was Natasha kind of singled out because she had a stronger personality, because she wasn't a nice, sweet, like Relief Society woman, and she said the thing, and she said it strongly, and then they were like, "You have to go," because was she saying something different than what Julie Hanks and Jennifer Finlayson Fife say?
She didn't keep sweet enough.
She
That's
didn't keep
right.
sweet enough.
Direct and challenging.
Yes, and this is like classic, like the stereotyping women into like feminazis, right? Is that like you start speaking up and they're like, oh, she's irrational, or she's, too aggressive, or so I don't know. Again, this is my own hot take, and I think I love Jennifer Finlayson Fife and I love Julie Hanks. I love what they're doing. But yeah, but I do think it's very interesting that progressive Mormon women are coming at this from a mental health perspective, because I think it speaks to how much women in the church have suffered and want to find healing and to fix these things that have happened.
I mean, the great threat to Mormonism is the awakening of their women. And so the church has historically been more terrified of feminism than anything.
Well, the church functions on the backs of women doing invisible work, and we're both kind of involved in ex-Mormon Twitter, which is a jungle. I mean, it's wild, but it's also good because I really like interacting with other ex-Mormons. It's been very therapeutic. But there was one time there was kind of an argument going on, and people were talking about how women, like don't have power and authority in the church. And a guy who was active LDS, he said that's not true. Women in my ward are doing everything. And so everybody was like kind of jumped on him, and they were like, I know that's the problem, is that they're doing everything. They're teaching all the classes, and they're doing the things, and they're planning the activities, but they don't have a chance to be autonomous, and they don't have a chance to influence the organization. And so then are you really like, is this really feminism, or are they just being used?
Exploited.
Yeah, is their work just being exploited by the organization?
So we'll end on this question. Should the church be worried with the rise of Julie Hanks and Jennifer Finlayson Fife and their influence? I don't want to put a target on their back, but the church always hates anyone gaining a following, including other general authorities like Paul Dunn or even Uchtdorf, right? But especially if women.
I'm sure it's a concern. Do you think it's a concern?
I think they've got lots of things to be concerned about.
That's right.
But they're well liked.
I think that is one of them, though, for sure.
Yeah.
But I think they've got lots of things to be concerned about.
Do you think many women who follow these other women, that following progressive Mormon women is probably highly correlated with an eventual loss of faith?
I think it may not always lead there, but I think that it is.
I think
see it.
I think it's very hard to stay in the church if you really, really understand systems of oppression, because I think that you start understanding that this is very structural. It goes very deep, and so I think it's really hard. But at the same time, I want to say that they always are like, it's not my job to tell you to stay in the church or not. It's my job to help you be a better person and to develop yourself as an individual. And so I know that they're not trying to do something. And I think that they have found a place where they have purpose in the church, and it's functional, and it's good for them. So I think they're doing really good work. But I think once you start cluing into these types of things, you start to say women are not well represented. Do women have full body autonomy in the church? Do women, these are all things that are very deeply rooted in the church.
And that quickly leads into the sexual dysfunction that I think was such a huge issue.
Yeah, identifying, like this
recognized,
is a thing.
And they were the ones who put us on that path. I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
For sure.
Yeah.
To be able to recognize that.
Well, I'll send out Milo. Julie Hanks is a friend. We've led several mixed faith retreats together.
No,
I love
they're
her.
fantastic. Yeah,
and
they're just great.
I just saw Jennifer Finlayson Fife at a Faith Again, whatever conference with Fiona Givens, and they even had Carolyn Pearson up there.
Oh, nice.
Go Julie, go Jennifer.
They're doing good work.
You're doing the Lord's work.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and whether people stay or whether they go, they are teaching women and men how to develop and be better people. And so I think they're doing a good work.
All right. Well, that concludes part 2 of our interview with Larissa and Jeff Kindred. And come right back for part 3. We're going to be talking about breast cancer, faith challenges, LGBT child, and most importantly, sexual dysfunction that's tied to porn, to masturbation, to your cancer diagnosis. That's going to be probably maybe the major theme for part 3. And then hopefully some healing and and some sexual empowerment.
Yes.
Female sexual empowerment that hopefully will, and some deconstruction that hopefully has a happy ending.
Yes.
Yeah?
I think so. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks guys. And Margie, it's just so lovely to have you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
You enjoyed today?
I have.
You couldn't say no. So, I mean, you have to say yes.
No. Thank you for that, though.
I know you loved it. All right. Thanks, everyone. And come on right back for part 3 of this amazing interview. Be kind to each other, be good to each other, and come right back for part 3. Take care, everybody.